So for the fourth time, I'm Sydney Berry, and this is going to be my speech on the importance of vaccination. So, throughout the existence of humanity, we have evolved to fight diseases that plague us. Our bodies are always trying to create more antibodies in order to be more ready for the germs that infect us. Our species has had horrible diseases that have killed millions of people. Luckily, in 1880, Louis Pasteur created the first vaccine. Since then, fatalities from many diseases have dropped significantly. For instance, smallpox has been around for at least 1,500 years and probably more. It has killed an uncountable number of people in its history. In fact, in the 20th century alone, it managed to kill over 300 million people. And yet, somehow, nobody seems to get it anymore. For that, we can thank vaccines. The World Health Organization was able to declare smallpox completely eradicated. In other words, smallpox literally does not naturally exist anymore. But ever since vaccines were introduced, there have been people that do not believe in them, that are willing to fight for their right to kill their children. This may seem over the top, but it really is true. The anti-vaccine movement is led by people who think that they understand science better than scientists do, or that they understand medicine more than doctors do. This kind of situation would be hilarious if it wasn't actually literally killing people, especially children and the elderly. People without degrees in any form of science are claiming that they're the only ones who can tell you that what are in vaccines, just because they're able to look up the toxicity of a certain ion and not of a compound. These people know nothing about science, but they don't have to. They have the fear factor. And then when somebody who has actually taken a course in chemistry tries to talk to them, a lot of times they'll start calling the person a big pharma shill and will claim that they are being paid by the pharmaceutical industry in order to push their products. So we can tell that some people claim that vaccines are not important. Some others claim that vaccines don't do anything. It was better sanitation and healthier diets that eradicated smallpox, and that got rid of so many others. Because it definitely makes sense that better sanitation only managed to kick in the same year that the vaccine for smallpox was invented, and will only help out with other diseases in the future year right when the vaccines are invented. This way of thinking is completely and utterly ridiculous. If you look at graphs of time versus infections of any disease that has a vaccine, you will see a very sharp decrease in infections or deaths at the time that the vaccine was introduced. It isn't very hard to understand, just most people refuse to look at the data unless it supports their arguments. One of the most common ways that anti-vaccine advocates will convince people to join their side is by insane fear-mongering over the ingredients in vaccines, even though they may be completely safe and harmless. One such ingredient is formaldehyde. A lot of people got very freaked out because long-term exposure to large amounts of formaldehyde will kill a person. Even long-term exposure to small amounts can do that. There are a maximum of 100 micrograms of formaldehyde in any vaccine. Most do not contain any at all, and the ones that do usually contain less than 10 micrograms. But anti-vaccine advocates want you to see this and think, oh no, formaldehyde, it's going to kill me and my children. But anti-vaxxers are not scientists. They don't know anything about how science works. Formaldehyde is a naturally occurring compound, CH2O or HCHO. It has antifungal properties that make it perfect to be in fruit. And as such, most fruits do contain formaldehyde. An apple can have around 1,500 micrograms, and a pear can have about 12,000 micrograms. Now remember, there's a maximum of 100 micrograms in any vaccine. 100 to 1,500 to 12,000. The amount of formaldehyde in a vaccine is so small that it doesn't even affect the amount of formaldehyde in the body. It is generally broken down by formaldehyde dehydrogenase, which is a compound that naturally exists in the body to break down all of the formaldehyde that you ingest within a couple minutes. Another similar situation to this one was one that occurred with a compound called thimerosal. It has a very long, very complicated chemical formula, and it's C9H9HGNaO2S. A complicated formula, but anti-vaxxers seem to think they have found the root of all evil. That poor little mercury ion in the very middle. Mercury is another thing that is very dangerous, should you ever come into contact with pure mercury. And you should never, ever inject even the smallest amount of it into you. But thimerosal is not mercury. It's simply a compound that contains a mercury ion. For people who don't understand chemistry, they might not understand the difference, but there's a huge one. For instance, you should never come into contact with pure chlorine. Never, ever. If you breathe in chlorine gas, you will start to cough, you'll be in extreme pain, and you'll probably die. If any gets into your eyes, you can go blind. So, then why is salt an accepted compound? NaCl. So, half of all the ions in that compound are chlorine, as opposed to thimerosal, where only 1/23 of all the ions are mercury. On top of that, there are multiple different kinds of mercury, and the two most common are ethyl and methyl. Methyl is the one that will actually cause you harm, while ethyl is harmless and naturally occurring, especially in minute quantities such as this one. And any guesses as to which form of mercury is in thimerosal? That's right, ethyl mercury, the one that cannot cause you any harm, especially when it's really, really small amounts. Yet, somehow, with no scientific evidence or anything, anti-vaxxers managed to make rules and regulations that ban thimerosal from products given to kids, mostly because they convince gullible parents that thimerosal can cause autism. That leads me to my next point. Vaccines do not cause autism. Did you hear me? I said vaccines do not cause autism. Do I need to speak any louder? Do I need to shout it over the emergency alert system so that everybody can hear me? Anybody? No? Good. Because vaccines do not cause autism. The myth of this idea came from a now discredited scientist by the name of Andrew Wakefield. He later lost his medical license when it was found that he had multiple undeclared conflicts of interest, had manipulated evidence, and had broken multiple other ethical codes. And yet somehow people in the anti-vax community hail him as a martyr because he discredited vaccines. Now we get to the reason why I want people to vaccinate their children so much. People in the anti-vax community will often say, "It's my child, it doesn't affect anyone else, let me do what I want." If this was true, it would be great. But unfortunately, it isn't. There's this term called herd immunity. If the majority of the population is vaccinated, the people who aren't vaccinated will all be but immune from a virus because of the fact that nobody around them is getting it, and they can't get it either. And unfortunately, there are some people who have parents that understand scientists, that support vaccines, but they cannot vaccinate their children. This could be because they are super allergic to one of the normally okay ingredients in a vaccine, or if especially they have some sort of autoimmune disorder, or if they have cancer. These are people that wish that they could vaccinate because they know of how important it is, but if they do, their children could suffer a horrible reaction or catch the disease that they are being vaccinated against. The other group of people that is at risk is the babies. They are too young to get vaccinated and their immune systems are not yet developed. If everybody is vaccinated and nobody gets diseases, the lucky babies will not be exposed and will not get one of these potentially deadly diseases. But as is in the case with an 18-month-old toddler in Berlin who died in the last measles outbreak this February, he died because of incompetent parents that made the decision to not vaccinate their children and he was exposed to it. The good news is, people in government are noticing this horrible, deadly trend. For example, in California, there is a bill to remove any exemption except medical for being vaccinated, if parents want to be able to roll their kids into school. SB 277 has already passed through one house of the California legislature. It is expected to pass through the legal system to become a law. Unfortunately, anti-vaxxers are pissed at this, but they're taking it too far. Some of them are comparing themselves to Holocaust victims, marginalized and persecuted by society for their personal beliefs about vaccination. Others, who are more scientifically illiterate, will try to compare themselves to famous scientists who weren't believed or were persecuted when they tried to share their findings with the community. If it isn't already obvious, there are so many reasons why you should vaccinate your children, and I am 100% in support of vaccination. I have many more reasons I could give you about why you need to vaccinate, but unfortunately I don't have a ton of time. Just please, vaccinate your children and make sure that you are vaccinated. The anti-vaxxer community is not a community of forward thinkers who know more about science than anybody else. It's just a community of scientifically illiterate people that want to be different, or to follow the herd of different people.